When Robert discovered those small kittens tucked away in the old barn, he experienced a peaceful happiness, the kind that only someone truly connected to nature could feel. He had no idea that in just a few months, this simple discovery would evolve into something entirely unexpected. Robert was a man of few words, his hands roughened by cold weather and years of hard labor. He had inherited a large piece of land in southern Russia, nestled at the base of mountain peaks that stayed white with snow for most of the year. Amidst his seasonal farming and neatly stacked firewood for the long, punishing winters, Robert lived alone, but never felt lonely. His favorite spot was the front porch, where he would sit with a mug of strong black tea, watching the icy mist roll down from the mountains and observing the wild animals that occasionally wandered onto his land, searching for warmth and shelter. One particularly cold morning, Robert noticed his leather work gloves were missing. He remembered using them last in the barn, so he went there to look. He rummaged through old boxes, shifted farming tools, and moved bundles of dried grass, until something beneath the straw caught his attention. There were the gloves, almost completely buried, but they weren't alone. Hidden behind the pile of hay, nestled into the dry plant material, were tiny, furry bodies curled up so tightly together they looked like a single mass. They were kittens, gray, sturdy, thick-coated little things with eyes barely open, watching him with an unnerving level of alertness. As Robert stepped closer, the kittens didn't bolt. Instead, they made low, strange sounds for such young creatures. Their bodies stiffened, and their eyes, though small, didn't register fear. They were studying him. Robert backed away, unsettled. This wasn't normal kitten behavior. He'd seen his share of barn cats over the years, usually offspring of the wild strays that roamed his fields. But these were different. Their stare was primal, and their fur much denser than any domestic cat he'd ever encountered. Curious, Robert stood still, letting the cold barn air hang between them, hoping something about their nature might become clear. The kittens, sensing no immediate threat, burrowed deeper into the hay. Yet the feeling that something was off clung to Robert. What troubled him most was the absence of a mother cat. In all his years tending animals, he'd never found kittens so young without a guardian nearby. "Where did you little ones come from?" he whispered to himself. He first considered that someone had abandoned them there, hoping they'd survive the bitter weather in the barn's relative warmth. Then he thought they might belong to a wild cat that had fled, either due to instinct or necessity. But the longer he stood there, the more he realized this wasn't going to be a simple matter. He decided to start with the basics. He left small bits of fresh meat nearby, hoping the smell would lure them out, but it didn't work. The kittens either ignored the offering or sniffed it with suspicion. Maybe they were too young for solid food, or maybe they weren't like other kittens at all. There was something unsettling about the way they moved, slow and deliberate, as though everything around them was strange and dangerous. Trying to hand-feed them led nowhere. Every attempt was met with growls or evasive swipes. Robert realized he'd need to take a more direct approach. Donning thick work gloves, the kind he used for chopping wood and handling sharp fencing, he crouched low and moved carefully. "Easy now, little ones," he murmured. "I'm not going to hurt you." One by one, he lifted them gently and placed them into an old wicker basket lined with a soft blanket. They responded with raspy meows and distrustful glares, but none bit or scratched. Back inside the house, Robert cleaned a corner of his bathroom, the warmest, quietest space available. He stacked cardboard boxes and draped towels to create hiding spots, offering a temporary sanctuary for animals still unsure of him. He left, the basket lid half open, and stepped away, giving them the freedom to emerge when ready. He believed trust should come on its own, not be forced. For days they hardly moved, preferring the safety of their new bedding. But the mood in the house began to shift. Robert's older cats, curious and cautious, crept near the bathroom, sniffing the air and watching the kittens with quiet interest. Robert's heart raced whenever he saw unease in their eyes. He still had no idea what kind of animals he was caring for. The kittens had shown no affection or friendliness. But then, something remarkable happened. The oldest cat in Robert's household, A spotted female who had been with him for many years began visiting the bathroom regularly. She moved with a calm wisdom, sitting quietly beside the basket as if guarding something precious. Then, in one of those mysterious acts only nature can explain, she began producing milk. "Well, would you look at that?" Robert whispered, watching in awe. "You've decided to become their mother, haven't you, old girl?" It was the moment a true connection began. The kittens nestled into her side as though they had known her forever. Slowly, the other cats began to tolerate and even accept the new arrivals. The kittens, once tense and fearful, started eating the meat Robert left for them, growing bolder each day. They even began watching him while he ate, their wide eyes filled with quiet wonder, as though trying to understand his world. Robert felt something shift within, a warmth that didn't come from control, but from letting go of the need to understand everything. After more than a month, Robert decided it was time to get some answers. He contacted George, the elderly veterinarian from the nearby village. "I've got some unusual little guests here," he explained. "Found them in the barn, and they're not like any cats I've seen." "Different how?" George asked. "Just come see when you can, you'll understand." Robert wasn't sure how the kittens would react to a stranger, but he hoped enough trust had developed. But before George could visit, the weather turned. Just as spring began hinting at its arrival, a brutal cold front swept through, blanketing the land in snow again. The road to Robert's farm became impassable. George couldn't come. The visit would have to wait. In the meantime, Robert split, his time between farm chores and caring for his unusual house guests. He still didn't know what kind of cats they were, but he no longer saw them as a burden. Though they still didn't seek out affection, they no longer ran from it either. They weren't fully wild, nor were they domesticated. And perhaps that mystery was what intrigued Robert most. As spring deepened and the demands of the farm grew, the veterinarian visit kept getting pushed back. There was always a fence to mend, a tool to fix, or an animal needing care. Meanwhile, the kittens. The kittens continued to grow larger and stronger. They began venturing out of the bathroom, exploring the hallways, poking their curious heads into every corner of the house. Soon, they discovered the wider world beyond the door. Robert adjusted his routine, keeping the back door slightly open. During the day, letting them decide when to come and go. They moved with growing confidence, darting around the farm. Though he still filled their bowls, they started hunting on their own. Small rodents began to disappear, and Robert would occasionally find quiet evidence of their hunting skills tucked away in the corners of the yard. "You're becoming quite the little hunters, aren't you?" he'd say with a half-smile, marveling at their wild nature. Still, something about their bond with him remained uncertain. They never curled up on his lap or rubbed against his legs. They didn't follow him from room to room or greet him at the door. They tolerated him, watched him, but they didn't seem to need him in the way most cats did. Sometimes he felt more like an observer in their world than a part of it. Yet even without obvious affection, they filled the farm with a quiet, powerful presence he'd never known before. The barn became their preferred shelter, especially during the colder nights. They hid between hay bales or vanished into shadowy corners, returning only after sunrise. On days when visitors or delivery trucks came by, the cats disappeared completely, leaving no sign they'd ever been there. Robert grew to understand and respect this behavior. He even began making changes to the land, scattering large stones and dragging hollow tree stumps to various parts of the property, natural shelters and lookout spots. It was his way of telling them they belonged here, even if they chose to stay on the outskirts of his world. Months passed since he'd first found them tucked in the hay. Now fully grown, they moved through the property with silent grace, leaping over fences, scaling barn walls, vanishing into tall grass. But one late afternoon, a new situation forced Robert to finally call for help. One of his dairy goats had fallen ill, and he needed George, the old village veterinarian. George arrived promptly, examined the goat, and gave a reassuring smile. "Just a mild infection. A few days of antibiotics and she'll be fine." Relieved, Robert walked him to the gate, As they reached it, George turned and asked, "By the way, those kittens you told me about, are they still around?" Robert chuckled awkwardly and pointed toward the barn. "If you want to see them, now's the time. They usually settle in there around this hour." George nodded. "Let's take a look then. I've been curious ever since you mentioned them." They walked quietly to the barn, but the moment George stepped inside, the cats melted into the shadows like mist. Still, one lingered in the corner, eyes gleaming from the dark. George crouched slowly, staring at the animal with widening eyes. "Robert," he whispered, excitement breaking through his voice. "Those aren't regular house cats. Do you know what you've been raising all this time?" Robert looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" George leaned closer to the shadowy figure. "Palace's cats," he said reverently. "Wild cats, incredibly rare, native to this region's mountains, but practically never seen up close. You've raised a whole litter of them without even realizing it." Robert stood in stunned silence, the truth sinking in. It all made sense. Their eyes, their hunting instincts, their distance, the way they refused human affection. "They're not supposed to be living with me, are they?" he asked softly. George shook his head. "Not as pets, but what you've done, it's extraordinary. They're healthy and thriving. That's no small feat." "I had no idea," Robert said, still shaking his head. "I just did what felt right." With George's guidance and help from a local conservation group, Robert stepped into a new chapter of the story. Transitional shelters were built, experts were brought in, and slowly, the process of reintroducing the cats to the wild began. "It wasn't easy," Robert admitted. "Letting them go is harder than I thought it would be." "I know," George replied, "but what you've given them is beyond measure. A second chance to live where they belong." Letting go wasn't about rejection. It was about recognizing their place in the world. Robert stood one last time at the edge of his land, watching the cats disappear into the mountain wilderness. They hadn't left him. They had returned to where they were meant to be. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for letting me be part of your story. Did you enjoy this story? Would you have let them go too, or would you have kept them? Let us know in the comments. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. Sometimes the hardest decisions come, not from emotion, but from listening to the quiet truth in your heart. Thanks so much for listening. See you in the next video. Have a wonderful day.